It's Game On Financial Podcast. You're going to get to meet our special guest who's talking over me right now. But I'm Garrett, normal host, partner here, Game On Financial, Orsini and Associates. We've got Joseph, other co-host, Game On Financial manager. What's up, everybody? And then our guest today is Melanie, partner, Game On Financial and Orsini and Associates, an owner. For those who don't know what partner means, an owner of the firms, along with myself. Melanie, do you want to talk about yourself? Tell us a little bit about what's going on. I don't know. We'll get into your backstory in a minute, but do you just want to give like a brief overview of kind of who you are and how long you've been doing this?
My name is Melanie Orsini. I have been in accounting since 2006.
Whew. Sorry.
Oh, that's a harsh number when you say it out loud.
Put a little bit of age on yourself with that one there.
Yeah. What I meant to say is 2020. I've been doing this since 2020. No, that's not true. I did graduate college and start working in accounting in 2006. I didn't actually go into public accounting, though, until, when was that? 2009? I guess it really wasn't that many years later.
It's 2023, by the way, for the chat.
Yeah, for anybody who's wondering. And we'll come back to this in a minute.
We're not going to troll Melanie the whole time.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
She usually likes to add in the office when we're in here that she's the mom of all of us.
Hopefully,
I'm not the mom. I am the oldest.
Hopefully throughout the podcast you get to see there's a very interesting dynamic, and it's funny because you've probably seen just me and Joseph to date, and we're going to have more guests on, but I think Melanie's a perfect one to start with because we definitely, like, if we have chemistry or a dynamic with anybody that comes on the podcast is going to be Melanie. Naturally, we work together all day, and we'll kind of get into that. But you were saying your background, so public accounting 2009.
And let's see that. I mean, I've been doing taxes and bookkeeping ever since. Maybe that's a thing I could say is my specialty. My specialty is tax, bookkeeping, small business, medium business. So that's how I got here. That's not a lot of details, but
was there any other, like, so you started in accounting your career? You have never done anything else besides accounting? Straight out of school, straight into the accounting industry?
Yep. First big girl job. Yeah. I was the accountant for a medical supply company, and
so private accounting first.
Private accounting first, and then I started dating a guy who's now my husband, and he lived in Savannah.
Shout out Joe, by the way.
Shout out Joe.
Mojo Joe, if anybody's out there on
Heck yeah.
On Discord, we have played Discord. Call of Duty, played everything with him, so another common theme, but go ahead.
Yeah, he's out there doing that. Although we've done a lot of Diablo lately.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of
I've done a ton of Diablo lately. I mean, Joseph gives me hell on every single gives me hell. Diablo. But no, we've talked about that so much, and so the funny thing is we haven't played it all together. I've literally, I feel like I've no-lifed it, but I haven't played with Joe or you or really any of my other accounting friends or any of our clients, and so I would not have seen that coming. I thought when it came out, you and I were probably going to play a bit, but I think our schedules just haven't lined up with it.
100%. That's definitely the case.
We talk about on some of the other episodes where we've talked about just like trying to find time to game and how it can be hard. And just meshing with different schedules. So that's part of it. Yeah,
definitely part of it right now.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Okay, so you're good. Walk us back. So you said 2009 you graduated, you met your husband, and Joseph was asking, previous to like accounting, you talked about private and you talked about then going public and all that. I'm going to just reiterate the question. Did you have any other jobs or anything else? Because like in college, obviously, I think you were a waitress and you did a couple other odd jobs, but after school, talk to me about the transition into private and kind of where you worked, because I think that's an interesting story. And then talk to me about also
how I got that job or what that company did.
No,
we
both.
could go
both.
a lot of ways there.
Yeah, what they did is obviously very interesting, but then you're going to have to get the backstory because I think a lot of people are probably going to really wonder like what in the world. But once you talk about that, then talk about your transition to public and how you got into that, like why you did it, because your original story on the private I think is so interesting. It's almost like, well, why change? Why, so tell us about that. Start there.
Got it. Okay. As with most things in my life, I have a fairly untraditional path. But while I was in college, I actually really wanted to work in radio. Huge fan of music, love live music.
Still are, right?
And here we are.
Oh, yeah.
Well, here we are. We're live radio. There you go. So
absolute passion of mine. The irony of that is when I was going to school for radio, I wanted to be a manager and not a personality.
Sure.
I like to be important, but not the center of attention.
You are the center today. Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. You're doing great.
Yeah. I'm good with that. But I also like to hear my own voice, so there's that. So anyway, going through it, and as I was going through college, I decided to go into accounting kind of way late into my college career, much to the chagrin of my dad, who was paying for it. However, I got into it because basically when I was in school is when satellite radio and everything came out, and I just knew it was going to be the death of radio and there wasn't any money in it. And I got really nervous about how I would make a living going forward. Mm-hmm. But at the time I was getting a minor in business, and turns out I was really good at accounting, like where other people were struggling. And I was looking around the room going, really? Okay.
That's exactly the same thing that happened to me. We were in my first principles, I think it was, principles of accounting. Same thing. I had like a A, which wasn't traditional for me. I was bad in school, and everyone in the class was struggling. Yeah, everyone in the class was struggling. I was like, this seems easy. So same exact thing there. So
bad is relative though. You weren't. You may have been bad for you and what you consider as good.
I had to try really. Like I had to study a lot, where some people could be like, just look at it the night before. So
yeah.
But go ahead. Sorry.
No. But I found it really easy, and as he noted, I was a waitress, and I was actually bartending one night, and one of my professors came into where I was working, and he was like, you're doing okay in the class, but you don't seem to like it. And so I was explaining to him ultimately what I wanted to do, and just for background, at the time I was a journalism major because I thought that's how you got into radio. Or it's what I shouldn't say it's how I thought, a different professor told me that's the way you do it.
This was an accounting professor you're talking to though?
No, this was one of my journalism majors.
One of your journalism, okay. So he said you don't seem to like it.
And I didn't. That's very, very, very true.
Right. Okay.
And so I was explaining what I wanted to do, and he said, I need you to go talk to this other guy who was actually the head of the radio portion of the journalism school. And he sent me to go talk to an actual radio station manager, which was kind of cool. He let me shadow him all throughout the day. And also one of my regulars at the restaurant I was working at the time was a radio station manager in town, and he gave me similar advice, but basically they were like, you don't need a journalism degree, you need a business degree if you want to run a radio station.
Okay.
And at the time, I was killing it in accounting, so here we are.
There you are. I just want to point out that actually seems interesting that a professor took that much initiative, because at this time, were you at South Carolina?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're at a major university, and a professor walks into the bar that you're working at that night and just tells you this, basically, looking out for you in a way, saying like, you just don't seem very interested in it. I think that's interesting. Like, I can't think of a time where a professor did that in such a social setting for me. Like, yeah, if I never had an
experience like that for sure.
Yeah. So like in an office hours situation, like, yeah, maybe if I went to see them, they would say like, hey, I've noticed, whatever. But that's really interesting that they come in and say that to you at, where was it? You said you were bartending or waitressing at the time. So were you at a bar or were you just at a restaurant?
I was at a restaurant.
Okay, so
but I was
makes
bartending
sense.
at the restaurant. And just a plug for Nona's, which doesn't exist anymore. The owner's retired and it closed.
Shout out Nona's.
Shout out to Nona's, that doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, no, working there that night. And keep in mind, he came and sat at the bar and was like getting food to go. So we were chit-chatting for a few minutes. It's not like he just walked up and said, you don't like my class much, do you?
Mm-hmm. Well, good. I mean, that's awesome though. So kind of guiding your path there. And then that led to you getting ultimately, or going down the path of getting a business degree, but you were just in accounting. So you said, okay, I'm going to go the accounting route at this point.
Well, at the time, my minor was in business.
Okay.
And so, really all the minor is all the intro to the finance and economics, accounting, all those things that are in a business school. But I was in the intro to accounting at the moment, and I really was like killing it.
You were just acing it, yeah.
Ironically, that's also what my dad did. My dad's an accountant, or was an accountant. He's retired now. Unintentional. And most of the people in my life that have known me my whole life cannot believe that I'm a CPA.
Well, now, but the thing is, if you think about it, just because I know you personally, so your dad was an accountant, your brother is incredibly smart, went to West Point, smart, and your mom's a real estate agent now, doing well here in town in Savannah. And so, like, just your family in general, I don't know that I would have expected, looking at you like, oh, she's going to be dumb. I would have thought the opposite. Like, you're probably going to do okay just because, you have a good
and all of the people that are
holistically
shocked with me for doing accounting aren't shocked because I'm not intelligent.
Okay, so that's a fair point, because I'm shocked that you're an accountant too, just because I personally know you.
Personality-wise,
but intelligence-wise, no, I would have thought like, yeah, you're probably going to do okay. You would be okay doing a number of things.
No one was questioning my intelligence on it. Is more I am as you said, you know me on a personal level. It's shocking that I'm an accountant.
Melanie, just for background for those listening, Melanie's very outgoing. She's not your traditional, when you think accountant, you think older white male with a suit on in an office, probably a little introverted, not Melanie.
Not introverted, difficult to talk to, like so far beyond introverted. And Melanie is if that's on a spectrum, Melanie is the complete opposite.
Melanie's like the type at a party that can talk to anyone, start talking about anything, get along with anybody. So
we'll talk to anyone. It's going to happen. Like she's going to talk,
especially if there's a drink in her hand.
Yes.
Yeah. Melanie makes her way around the room, and though Joseph and I do that too, and I would say Joseph and I are probably more similar in, I guess, how we probably interact with people and stuff like that. We all three probably don't get we probably don't give the traditional accountant vibe, not for good or for bad. We just, most people, I think, because you've gotten the same, right? People say like, you're not an accountant, there's no way. And you're like, yeah, I am, and I've got the same thing. Really, most people ask you if you're military, right? Because of the hair, and you're just kind of clean cut. And so, yeah, I get that a lot.
Like a fresh haircut.
If I go to a restaurant, they ask me all the time, and I understand this because they, there are discounts for like military. And
FYI, there's only a military base in the center of our town.
But I get that at other places too, and it's just because, like, especially when I don't have a beard or any facial hair. But that's the thing, is I don't think any of us fit the mold, but I would say you especially stand out as not fitting the mold because you almost seek that out. You live downtown because you like the
activity
people,
and all
activity,
there's stuff going on all the time.
And generally speaking, most traditional accountants, or at least the stigma around accountants, is they don't enjoy that. And you do. You would rather be in client meetings.
I would say too, though, as we get into like her story a little bit more as we go, I think that's why you've seen some of the success you have in your career and why you've been able to gain clients and these types of things is because of exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. I don't want to skip this either. So you went from that situation happened in college, and now you're transitioning out of college and you go into a private job. Tell me about that, because this is a really interesting story I want to hit on and what you did in the beginning of your career.
Okay. So yes. And so because I came into accounting way late. I think I started it in my 3rd or 4th year of college, which, by the way, it did take me 6 years to get my undergrad. Not because I failed, just it took me a hot minute to figure out what I was going to do. And I had all kinds of majors in between there. But that being said, what ultimately got me to accounting is, like I said, the guy said, this isn't how you do it. I was really good at it, got there. But then even in that moment when I was in school, and it was a big university, so they push internships and do all of those. I didn't have time because I was already behind kind of in the course curriculum. I had to ask a lot of professors for special exemptions because they make you take classes in certain orders, and I would still be going if that was the case.
Which I hate, by the way. That's so dumb because of some of those intro classes have nothing to do with what you're
like
trying to do.
Like the next level, yeah.
So they gave you the exemptions though because of that. Like they recognize, like, okay, yeah, you're good.
Yeah, and again, kind of back to it, I had good grades. There wasn't. I think I was, if there was a candidate to get it, they understood. Most of the time when I went in there, they didn't even ask why. They just looked at my grades and said, okay, check. Mm-hmm. So I didn't do any of the internships, which was a bummer. But also the other side of that is, at the time when you did internships, it was usually at the Big Four or the big firms. And I knew when I graduated, I did not, ironically, want to go into public accounting at all. I wanted to be
also
the CFO or controller.
Also, the Big Four looks a lot different than even this firm is technically public accounting. It's Big Four is a lot different.
Yes. And all I can imagine are 70-hour weeks, crazy busy seasons, and that's not what I wanted to do at the time.
To give some background to people, public and private accounting. Private accounting is when you're working internally at maybe a big company. So think of Coca-Cola, for example. You're an accountant and you only work for Coca-Cola internally, and that's it. Public accounting is when you service multiple clients, all over the place. It could be just 2 clients or it could be 2,000, but public accounting is basically you serving a lot of people, and private, you're serving just one company. So I want to make that distinction because when we say that out loud, obviously we get it. I don't know that anybody else understands. So you didn't want to go into public.
Nope.
And you didn't want to service a bunch of clients. You wanted to go internal. And I guess was the goal at that time, still relating back to journalism, you wanted to do something related to that, or what? What was your whole goal in I don't want to go public, I want to go private. Why was that? Besides the hours, I know you mentioned
it was the image of what public accounting was, and that didn't seem like a fun life at all.
Okay, so what was that image? Talk about that, because I think a lot of people can probably speak to that if we think about it that way, or we did at that time, what do clients think about us? Like, why did you look at public accounting and say that doesn't look fun?
Really, it kind of boils down to the hours that like it was at the time very, very demanding. You were going to work buckets of hours, obviously during busy season, and your busy season may vary depending on whether you're in auditing or tax.
Yeah.
At this point, there's so many options in the accounting world. So there's kind of the IT portion is a big thing now.
Consulting, I mean, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all of that kind of stuff. But the moral of the story is the universal understanding was you worked, 50 to 60 hours in off season and then 60 to 80 during busy seasons. And as somebody who likes to travel and go to concerts and that sounded horrible. That sounds horrible. And so, I just didn't want to do that. I really didn't want to do that. And I will be honest, when I got my degree, I didn't necessarily, even though I got into it because that's how they told me you ran a radio station, I didn't necessarily go that route. I just, a job. I just needed a job.
And now here you are in public accounting. So at some point, something changed in your mind. Can you walk us through that and how you got to this point where now you own a public accounting firm? You own 2 public accounting firms.
So that, like I said, I worked for a medical supply company, and that was great. The people I worked with were fantastic. That was a good company. I very much enjoyed my experience there. However, it was very, very monotonous. It is every day I went in and did the exact same thing, and you could almost make a calendar every month of, okay, the 1st through the 5th we do this, the 5th through the 10th we do this, and it just was.
And at the end of the month, it recycles again.
Recycles again. It was very boring, and it was very boring in the sense of that's what I imagine everybody thinks of accountants is you sit there and you do data entry and you add, subtract, multiply, and divide and spit out a report. That's exactly what I was doing. And while the environment was great, that sucks.
Yeah.
So boring.
Did you get paid okay though?
I did get paid okay.
So it just wasn't worth the money, but you still got compensated pretty well to be an accountant in a private accountant.
Yes. Yeah, I got compensated very well. And I actually worked for a family company. And I got kind of bonuses just because I knew because I was the accounting department. It was just me. I did all of it. And so you saw all the for lack of a better term, nepotism.
Yeah.
And while I got bonuses, I would love to be so savvy as to say they were earned. I did good work. I'm not saying that, but a lot of times I definitely felt like it was hush money.
Yeah. So
I was okay with that. By the way,
was that because it was a small company? You mentioned a family company, but was it small? Like
yes,
10, 15 employees. What are we talking here?
There may have been. I want to say, so it was medical supplies, and so there was the retail front, and there were 2 ladies that ran the front. We had 2 ladies that worked in the insurance billing department, the owner, his daughter, and then we had a sales staff of, I'm going to say 10 people. So it was 20-ish. But it was still a small family-owned company.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, relatively small, and so you were getting bonuses and stuff like that. The reason I bring that up is, I mean, obviously we're a small company, and so you go into a bigger company, especially like a traditional accounting firm, and there are set ways you're doing things and whatnot, and it's just already kind of baked in that this is how things operate and this is how it's going to go. With a small company, you're going to get a bunch of flavors. I don't know another way to put it. And so you could have like a family-run company where,
all right, we're back.
But so you have in this case, you have a family company, but in our case, it's just 2 business partners, you and I come together, and we'll talk about that more later, but it's very much like not a family company where
it's a different dynamic.
We're not promoting people based, not that this happens at every family company, but I guess what I'm trying to say is with a smaller company, you're kind of running a risk there that you don't know really what you're going to get private or public accounting, versus a big traditional firm, especially at the Big 4. It just is what it is already.
Mm-hmm.
That's already like you're coming in, the culture set, this is how it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's interesting that you say that because, I just couldn't imagine a world. I've never actually worked at one of those where if you're not part of the family, you're not moving up or you're going to hit a ceiling at some point. That's interesting to me.
And I don't think this place was like that. If you did good work, they would let you move up.
Sure.
But
your bonuses, though, were different than the cousins bonuses and stuff like that.
Yeah, there was definitely, like if he was giving money to one of his kids or just you saw all the things that happened. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
You saw all the things that happened.
And so you grew tired of working there, or there was another thing that happened, a catalyst, if you will, that drove you into public accounting?
So kind of two things happened at once. Like I said, that was very boring. And so there was that. Also, as I mentioned at the time, I started dating who is now my husband. And that job was in Evans, Georgia, which is just outside of Augusta. And at the time, my husband lived in Bluffton, South Carolina.
Okay.
About 4 hours apart?
It's just shy of 3.
Okay.
Still a long distance though.
Long distance.
How did y'all meet? How did you meet him if he's working and living 3 hours away from where you were working at the time?
So I grew up I didn't grow up, but I graduated high school in Aiken, South Carolina, and that is where his family lives. And so when he went to college, he went to Georgia Tech his first year, and then he transferred to Aiken Tech, which is not Aiken Tech, I'm sorry, USC Aiken. And went there and
disrespectful talking about South Carolina at Aiken like that, called it Aiken Tech. Man, come on.
Well, there is an Aiken Tech.
Yeah.
There's one of those too,
No
but that's not where
Aiken
he went.
Tech.
That's not where he went. He went to USC Aiken. And so he moved back in with his parents. And at that time, I was also at college in Columbia, but he started, because he lived in Aiken, worked in Aiken, and went to school in Aiken, he started meeting various people in Aiken who were the same people I graduated high school with. So like when I would come home for Christmas and those kind of things. And then of course, when I moved back to the area to work for my medical supply company, I again hung out with the same people I'd hung out with back then. And so we ran in the same circles for a weird brief period.
Okay. And so y'all start dating and get married, and then
And you're bored of your job.
job.
Well, and we weren't married yet. We didn't get married till 2011. But I basically was like, okay, I turns out I don't want to be a controller. And so I decided to go back to school. And since I was going back to school, might as well move. So I came down to Bluffton, started going to a satellite program in Savannah at Georgia Southern.
There we go.
Gotcha.
So I got the credits I needed to sit for the CPA exam. And when I moved to Savannah, I just basically, for like the month before I knew I was moving, just went home every day and started emailing out resumes I just went down the Google search of accounting firms. And actually, I applied to a whole bunch of places. I applied to several companies on the ports, just whatever I could to get a job to get down here. But I ended up working in a public accounting firm, which for my personality was so much better than private accounting.
Why do you think that was? You think it was just because the mix up, you get to see different client situations and it kind of felt like it was constantly changing a little bit, or what?
Yeah, well, the other thing too is when I worked in private, I talked with the ladies in insurance and my boss, and those are, company wise, those are the only people I interacted with. Obviously, I talked to all the coworkers, but, and Kevin, if you're out there, what's up? He sat in the cubicle across from me.
Shout out, Kevin.
Shout out, Kevin.
That's how Joseph and I met, and that's how you and I met.
We'll get to
that.
We'll get to that in a minute.
We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, so I started working for Skinner Barndollar and Lane here in Savannah. And again, I loved it because you were constantly yes, filling out a tax return is pretty uniform, but because you're doing it with different clients, the information they provide you, how they're organized, just what their company does brings enough of an interest twist in it that is fun for me. But also I got to speak with the clients directly. So I was talking to all kinds of people all the time, which we've noted.
I felt like when I came into the industry, it was similar, and almost it was like every tax return you picked up for a different client was like its own little story. You got to see what they did for the year, what kind of activities. Sometimes it was new rentals or new activities, business activities. So I feel like each kind of had their own different little thing.
If I could go back to when I first started and it was so new to me and I was green and everything, everything was a little story, because you get so numb to it after a certain point and you do so many that you're trying, my job now is just to produce a deliverable and get it done and make the client happy. And you a lot of times can just skip by the fact that these aren't just numbers on a page. These are like how people made their money and what they did to earn that money. And, now you're saving them possibly money, and you have to bring yourself back to that. And I miss that, because hearing you describe it, that's what it was in the beginning for me. But now it's very much like I feel like I'm pulled in so many different ways now. I don't have the time to to do that and to really think through that. You know, I can only imagine with Jamarian and our other intern Carmen, who's now part-time as well. I can only imagine for them being, well, Carmen already had experience, but for Jamarian, it was a whole new world, you know? And so, yeah, if I could go back to that and relive that piece of it, that is what's the word I'm looking for? That is the glorious thing about accounting is we talk about the hours and all that. Sure, there are many complaints, but that's a beautiful thing about it is all the different stories you get.
Oh man, and for me too, it is. I mean, for the most part, accounting across anything is mostly the same. You know, whether you're manufacturing, retail, or service based, it tweaks a little bit, but learning the background, like and I wish I could come up with a good example now, but you know, like let's say, you know, a guy who puts in windows and totally making this up. And you're like, yeah, he orders windows, he puts them in, yada, yada. And then like you get the background in like I'm going to say juicy gossip of the window world. That's maybe a slight overstatement there, but like things happen and run and are done in ways you don't know till you get to see kind of
one of the cool things. Yeah, that's a great point. I just
love the behind the scenes to it as well.
100%. One of the cool things that I liked whenever I worked at the same firm actually, which is how me and Garrett met, is like it's the Savannah town that we live in, Savannah, Georgia, the town we live in is a small town, relatively speaking. And so like you start seeing like different families and how people are related and how kind of like you're talking about the background behind it, and not necessarily that it's all intermingled, but it's really interesting to see kind of why decisions are made and how some of that works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I just thought of a good example. So I used to work with an oil company, and I would have never guessed that at most gas stations, they don't own the gas in the ground. Somebody else does. They just own the inventory in the store. So that's a good example of kind of what I'm saying.
Just to put that out there, we all three worked on the same gas station, actually, or not gas station, the same oil company, and we all learned that at different points in our career, kind of unconnected. So it's funny that actually ties us, all three of us together, but not intentionally, if that makes sense.
Not intentionally. I learned how inventory is done on gas, like, so that's kind of like, it's just weird things I've never would have thought about or considered. I've now been exposed to.
Well, what's crazy is, you know, with that example specifically in that oil company, in all the other work we did, this is how different industries can be, because we work with so many doctors and hospitals, especially the three of us specifically worked on a lot of the same client groups. And so we had doctors and hospitals, and we kind of figure out how they worked. And then I worked on some banking stuff, and that was different. But the oil company was interesting because when you look at the P&L and stuff like that, because of how much oil and gas and all is coming through, you're looking at a P&L in hundreds of millions of dollars, but then they have cost of goods sold in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So the net profit, while it was still good for them, it wasn't like you look at the top line and you're like hundreds of millions of dollars are like, what the, but then you realize like, okay, they all
a lot of cost as well.
Yeah. Cause like, you know, you get the gas at, call it $3 a gallon, and then you sell it for $3.10, and you do that in so much volume that you just have money. That turns into a ton of money on the top line and cost of goods sold. That was so interesting to me because that was something so different than anything else I had done. I love the fact that now we're niched down and we specifically work with content creators and then real estate agents, brokers, investors. But if I could go back to that, especially in my younger days, that gave me so much experience, so much broad experience across a number of industries, which I think now, looking back, was incredibly valuable. That one, to me, stands out as being very different from the rest of them. So,
that one, yes.
And I know exactly which company you're talking about because
yes, you do.
There was one, and it was like, when I first started working, I was like, oh, like when they said, Garrett, you're going to work on this, and I was like, oh, wow, you know, I'm getting called up to the big leagues now. And it was just, you know, kind of not a defining moment in my career, but that was like, oh wow, I'm working on some big boy stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh man, if we have time later, we should come back to defining moments in your career.
No, I mean, we could talk about that. We'll get to that, and we can actually talk about that because some of my defining moments actually have to do with each of y'all at specific points in my career, but I have some with you, and then I have some with him, and they're actually different. I almost feel like the glue here because I think you were leaving when he was coming in.
Yes.
And y'all just missed each other.
Right.
But I was there for both of y'all, and it was weird because we'll get into it.
That's what I was going to ask next, just to transition us a little bit. So you,
I understand. Oh,
Thank you, Siri.
sorry.
So you come into public accounting, you're working in the industry for a few years. How do you and Garrett meet, right? Because somewhere in that time period of you being in the industry, Garrett's, a decent bit younger than you, and then I'm a little younger than him. He graduates, gets his CPA, he comes into the industry. How did you guys meet? Talk through that, and then we'll probably get to some of those stories that we were just talking about.
Okay.
We got to make sure our story lines up, so I'm going to let you go first.
Okay. Got it. Gotta get that straight before we get in court. So like I said, when I first came to Savannah, I worked for Skinner Barn, Dollar and Lane. Shout out to Mike, Gail, and Becky. Love you guys.
No longer a firm now.
No longer a firm. And kind of what happened is at the tail end of their career, they owned a building that, and it was in a part of town that this gentleman from Atlanta came in and was basically buying the whole strip up. And they all owned this building, and they were getting really close to retiring themselves. And so they sold the building to that guy basically to just one part of the exit strategy, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it was one thing that was handled. I assume it was a good deal. And as part of that, what they ended up doing is merging with another larger firm in town. And it was at that. Can we name things? Is that okay?
Whatever you want to
know
do.
the rules. Okay, so we merged with TJS Deemer Dana, which also kind of doesn't. It
does-
exists,
yeah,
but
I
it
was
doesn't
gonna say, it's
exist
not the
anymore.
same.
So
Yeah. I guess we can name drop because technically those two firms don't exist anymore. So.
and I'm not saying anything bad about them. But anyway, so we merged with TJS Deemer Dana, and that was in what 2015. 14,
You guys
14?
merged. Well, the merger took place in 14. I think y'all's first year at TJS, like the TJS office was 15, and then I started
Actually,
in 16.
I was about to say, I think it's the
I was a
reverse of that.
year
We moved
right
into
after.
their building in 2014. The merger didn't officially happen until 1/1/15.
Yeah, because I know I started 1/1 of 16, and I know I was a year after you guys did the big transition. So I kind of missed, and I'll let you speak to this. I kind of missed that the firms merging together, which was kind of a in a way a nightmare, right? I mean, there was like
It was a little bit of a debacle.
Yeah.
But good. I mean, a little bit of a debacle, but good.
Are CPA firms merging a common thing?
It's. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say I've looked up the statistics on this,
Yeah.
but just knowing what I know about what is happening in Savannah, it is definitely becoming more common. And I think, especially and if you guys out there in the nether regions that's not what I meant to say, out there in the in the world,
in the ether, ether.
That's the word I wanted.
We lost her. I was wondering how many times it was going to take us to lose you. This is the first time, and we're halfway in, so this is going back to the dynamic.
This happens quite often,
This
guys.
happens
Sorry.
often. So Melanie starts on a story, and then
Mid-sentence, I forget what I was saying.
I cut you off that time, so I'm going to take responsibility for that. But basically, it happens a lot where CPA firms merge, especially now here in the Savannah area. It happens a lot, and that's a very
as all the boomers are retiring and they had their smaller firms, they're trying to sell them off, but I think it's just been easier to be bought out by larger firms.
Yeah, the reason I bring it up is just because it is quite an uncomfortable process most of the time. Like, I don't know of any mergers that go through where everybody looks back and like, man, that was the smoothest thing ever. Like, the partners might say it because they're trying to keep morale up, but generally speaking, the staff absolutely hate it.
And the reason really is because you generally are dealing with older people as partners, and they're probably set in their ways. And so you have two sets of businesses merging processes, and people don't like change. I'm sure everybody out there's experienced this. People don't like change. So when you're merging two, existing processes together, one wants to do it one way, one wants to keep this process. And so you get some of that friction.
And you already had 3 partners there, and then another 10 or 12 at the new firm that was being established. So that's a lot of people to come. For me and you specifically, you and I can make a decision very quickly, but for 15 partners to get together and make
To
a
agree
decision,
on something.
well, and we'll get to that later, but that's ultimately probably why we kind of are here and not there anymore. But anyway, all right, so the firms merge, and all right, so Skinner Barn Dollar Lane, now you're at TJS effectively.
Now I'm at TJS, which, continue doing what we're doing, but I did quickly learn I am not a big firm girl, which I guess kind of loops back to what I was saying when I was in college. I didn't want to work for the big crazy firms.
How long did it take you to figure that out, though? Because you were at TJS for what, 3 years?
Right at 3 years.
Yeah.
I think almost exactly 3 years. Because we went there in October and I left in October.
it feels like you and I worked together there for a long time, because we built up a lot of rapport, and you and I worked directly together on a lot of things. But really, because I came in 16, which was a year after you had already been there, so you and I just had a good 2 years together, and that's it. When you look back, that's not a long time at all. But
It's not,
because you and I worked so close on a lot of different projects.
I taught him everything he knows, except for all the dumb things he does. I didn't teach him
the
those.
dumb things, which is actually most of what I do. But yeah, I mean, that's what I would say, honestly, is I would credit a lot of that to you. And then we had a really good manager who at the time when I first started, I despised.
Pam, I still love you.
Shout out Pam. I love her now because of everything that she taught me. But at the time, it was incredibly uncomfortable because she wouldn't let me slide
On
at
anything.
all. Yeah, it was
Nothing.
It was rough in the beginning. But so you start in 26, or you don't start. I start in 2016. That's how you and I met. We worked together for 2 years. And then, the only reason I'm moving us along is because we're already at 140. This is actually taking up a good chunk of time, but that's good. So you and I meet, we work together a lot, and that's where you and I first started. And we'll come back to defining moments later, but that's where you and I first start. We get to know each other really well. Then you give me some terrible news about 2 years into my career, 2 years into you, or 3 years into you being at TJS. What was that news? What were you doing that I did not like at all?
I left.
Yeah, you were leaving. I was pissed.
I left. I went to another firm in Savannah. I was promoted to tax manager, and that was fantastic. While obviously that firm didn't work out in the long run, I learned a lot there, and it exposed me to a lot, and it was mostly a great experience.
Would you say that's the period of time where you learned the most in your career, or at your first job?
Oh man, that would be a coin toss. I don't know if I learned more in like my first 2 years at SBL, or if I learned the most in 2 years at the other firm.
Well, I can say, like, looking at you in your career, because I became a third party once you left, and then you went on and did this thing. By the time you and I came back together and met, and you were talking about doing your own thing and this and that, by the time we had that conversation, you were different in that. I don't know if you developed more there or you developed more in your first 2 years at SBL, but I would say it was you probably developed a lot at both, but this was a different type of development. I think it really turned your mind into becoming a business owner rather than, I think it took you from, I'm just going to work here for forever, or I'm going to work at a place forever, to you saying like, no, it's my time to eat. I'm going to go get my own thing and do it, because you truly believe that you could at that point. I don't think at TJS you were at that point. I think at TJS.
No, and I will say when I was at SBL, when I started there, I was the person with the least amount of experience, and that did not change ever. I was always the newest person there, so to speak. And I didn't even realize, and that's the thing, I didn't even realize how much I had learned or was learning when I was at SBL. It wasn't until I went to TJS and had to start teaching people and telling people and working with other staff accountants that I was like, oh my God, I know so much.
You know more than you think you know.
Yeah, you know more than you think you know, but if you're, like I said, always at the bottom, like I wasn't ever in charge of teaching anybody anything or doing anything. Somebody was always reviewing my work. I couldn't even see how far I had come because I always felt like the dumbest person in the room.
I think there's also like tiers to growth in your career, right? And I can speak to this being the youngest one here. You know, your first 3 years, you don't know anything. You're building that small base. And then the next 3 to 5, you know, maybe 6 to 8, whatever, those years you're really having to kind of grow up a little bit. You get more responsibilities and things like that. And then probably at this time in your career, when you went to this next firm, you kind of had a lot of responsibility on your plate. And so that's kind of when you really have to step up. You've been in the industry or in your career long enough to know what you know. And so people kind of hold you to that standard. And so it's kind of sink or swim the same way when you started, but at a lot higher level.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about having the safety net of knowing somebody's going to look behind you and check you out. And so like you're like, close. Like, I'm not saying I did poor work or anything, but there was a certain amount of.
At 8 p.m. when you're tired on a Tuesday night and you're ready to go home, you're probably going to be done with the project, versus if your name's on it, you might read it one more time.
Yeah. Yes, exactly that. Or you're like, I remember looking up this code section one time. You know what? Let's do it real quick just to make sure I'm remembering this appropriately before I answer this very permanent question on this.
It's so funny because
tax return.
I remember specifically when we got here, and then we're kind of jumping ahead. We'll come back to this, but talking about growth in your career, I remember telling you, like, it's going to be really weird signing a tax return, like with my name on it. Like and you immediately shot back with, yeah, you get over that. Like, just like that, because you were a couple years ahead of me in that regard, and you had already done that. You had figured it out. That was old news to you, and to me, it was the next big thing. And it's funny.
It's like the scariest, most exciting thing. I mean, I remember that feeling.
I remember
that being like, oh.
Now, I mean, I don't know how many I've done. You're right. It's just another, yeah, exactly.
Well, in the first few years of your career, you do tons of returns, but again, like you said, someone else has their name on it. You feel like hands off.
Yeah, you're
and then you
wiping
get to
your hands of it.
You get to that management level, and you're doing them at a higher level. Maybe you're even reviewing, but your name's still not on it. And then the next step's what you guys are talking about, where it's like actually on you and your license. So
100%. And you move up slowly throughout every level. You know, when you become a manager and you're reviewing the intern's work, it's like ultimately you're still not responsible, but because, you know, so in our case, like if you were reviewing Jamarian's work and I'm going to review your work, then yeah, I mean, your name is on it now, so you're answering to me, but I'm answering to clients, and Jamarian's answering to you. At every level, it still feels like a lot of pressure, you know, and I wouldn't say that one is worse than the other. It's just funny how throughout your career, you're like, man, I'm 10 years in, I know what I'm doing. But then you go to sign that first return, and then you revert right back to feeling like an intern. You're like, oh, man.
You definitely feel that growth, right?
I don't know about this, you know, and then you like you said, you take one more look at it. Like, maybe I'll just print this one out instead of looking at it on the computer.
Screen, yeah.
I'm going to print this one out and just flip through it. It's so funny.
Yes.
You know, how that works is because at every level you're still growing. Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be 40 and, you know, we're going to be having the same conversation. And there are probably going to be, you know, interns or staff or, you know, God knows how many people we're going to have under us working for us at that point. And I'm still going to feel brand new. And there's going to be 100 people here looking at me like I just know everything.
Well, I think that speaks to the type of person you are, and even you, Melanie, of just always trying to get better, right? And so you're never really you don't ever feel like you're there because you always know you can improve. So that's a good thing.
I'm kind of at the point now where I know how much I know, but I know how much I also don't know.
Yeah.
And so you're like, oh, shoot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back. You're now at this new firm. You've already left TJS. You're at this new firm.
Mm-hmm.
You're a tax manager. And you're running things. Walk me through, because at this point we're getting close to where you basically jumped off and spread your wings. How long were you there, and kind of, you know, what made you want to go out on your own?
I was there for 3 years. I don't know specifically what made me want to go out on my own. I knew ultimately I wanted to be partner. Like even at SBL, I knew at some point I wanted to be partner.
Yep.
I think the tipping point there was I did not get the impression that the gentlemen I was working for at that firm were ever going to make me partner. And so I think that was the real motivation to go out on my own. That, and also at that same time, me and my husband had been talking. We were like, knowing I didn't want to stay at that firm and I wanted to go out and do on my own. He was at a place where he was happy, but also, you know, like if we want to move and like stick our flag somewhere else, now would be the time to do it.
Try something new.
Something new. And at that time, I actually went and got my license in other places, just in anticipation of literally picking up, selling our house, and moving somewhere else. And also at that time, another old coworker of ours had reached out and basically said, in a crazy manner, she was like, hey, I had this thing lined up to buy a firm from these gentlemen, but I think I want to go into nursing.
I forgot about that. That part of our story, I just completely blanked that out and forgot about that. But yes, okay, so.
Yeah, so like I said, another CPA friend of mine, she was like, I'm checking out, but I feel bad because these guys were getting ready to retire. They were doing it on my word. And so basically, would you come and step in my shoes? I met those guys, thought about it. There was a lot of thought in it. And obviously, ultimately, I made the decision to do that because here we stand.
Yep.
Or sit. We're sitting. But yeah, essentially, I made the decision. A couple of things serendipitously came together, and at that time, I think I even took you to lunch and said, "Would you want to work for me?" And you were like, "No, I'm a company man. I'm a company man," which is fine. It's fine.
I had a wife, and I didn't have a baby on the way at that time. I think I just had a wife. I don't know if I had a baby on the way at that time.
That would have been in February of 20.
Yeah.
Or it may have been closer to March or April. Yeah, you couldn't have been pregnant yet. That would have been.
Yeah, no.
Or Macy would have been pregnant for a year.
Yeah. Okay. So I said no. Just just so that everybody's clear here, I said no because I was a company man at that time. I was entrenched in where I was, and I knew my growth path was going to be very good. And so I did say no. I said basically like I just don't see myself making the jump. I think at the time I would say, like, looking back, there was some level of fear there, not like an unhealthy amount. No, you're good. Not an unhealthy amount, but like I feel like if I make this jump, I'm gonna have to sacrifice something on a whim. And it's not that I didn't trust you, but it was like
you had a sense of security where you were,
I did.
And you were fine with that.
I was trading the security for the risk of owning my own business. And now I look back and I'm like, thank God I did what I did. But at the time, yeah, I mean, I was hard set. It's so funny because we'll probably get into it, but 6 months later, my mind had changed. But at the time, I remember I was pretty dead set on staying.
Well, and one thing we're leaving out too that's kind of important to the conversation is this was right around the time COVID happened. And so
it was. And I went out right before, I guess. We went out in February. COVID hit in March of that year, 2020.
It might have been beginning of March when you and I had that conversation.
Which for our firm specifically that we were all at, or the firm me and Garrett were at, that Melanie had worked at, it was a tough time. Like COVID was just a tough time, working from home, being back in office, and just the way things were handled was not the best, I would say, industry-wide, really. And so we were kind of all in a weird spot. So I think, Garrett, your default was like, no, I'm good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. At that time, I was good. And then,
I think that affected your decision for sure.
It definitely did. 100%. I think COVID affected the way management at the previous firm handled things, and that affected my decision as well. Mm-hmm. And then not to hate on them. Ultimately, I did what I wanted to do just because I thought at that time, I thought it was a good time to leap off and spread my wings as well. But yeah, when you and I first met, I said no. And that was, so what was the alternative? Who were you? You said you were reaching out to, it was Kevin next. Or was it not Kevin?
Oh, and I don't even remember who it would have been at that time. But
was I your first pick?
Yes.
You didn't know you had leverage, but you had leverage.
I was the first pick. I want to point that out, Stream. You heard her say it. I was first pick. So
you absolutely
first
were.
pick of the draft there.
Yep, absolutely were.
But you were going to do this regardless. I
was going to do it. Yeah, I'd figure out another way when it was that time, or had I needed to, I would have just figured out another way.
I think that's the best though. Like looking back, and this is like genuine because you and I haven't really ever talked about this, but not this specifically. But you were going to do this regardless, and I said no. Genuinely because I wanted that security. I changed my mind. I come back to you and I say, I am doing this now. At that time, I had made up in my mind, I was leaving that firm, whether
it was with me or not,
whether it was you or not. And so when you and I come together, we're both doing it with like no holds barred. We've made up our minds. This is how we're doing it. We might as well conquer the world together because I'm leaving. You're starting this new thing. We might as well just tackle this, right? Just do it. So,
so you guys make the decision to do it. This has been probably 3 years ago now, about 3 years ago now, and you guys make the leap. And what was that like? I know there was a transition period. You guys were coming in to purchase a firm from two gentlemen in their 70s, way outdated, all paper firm, more outdated than the firms that we were all at previously. What was that like? I know there was a lot of challenges there. I'm directing it at both of you guys.
I'll let Melanie go first there. It's hard to describe.
Overwhelmed, maybe the word.
Overwhelmed.
I don't. Just for the record, the two gentlemen we bought this from, they are great guys. Like genuinely good humans.
One of them has since passed away, and I do think about him quite often because it wasn't too long after we actually acquired the firm and we're going through the process. We were here when he first got the news that he had cancer, and then it developed into a bad situation, and he went downhill from there. And I think back to that now, and it's like that all seems like it happened so fast.
It really did.
But yeah, Gary Beasley, he was a great guy, and he was very great to work with. It was funny because he had his own quirks, and when I think back to him and you arguing about 3 pennies on an Excel spreadsheet, I still laugh to this day about that.
He honestly said he didn't trust Excel.
Microsoft Excel. He didn't trust the calculations in Excel because what did he trust?
His 10 key.
His 10 key. For those that don't know what a 10 key is, it looks like our Rode Podcaster 2 up there, except it just has numbers on it.
It spits out a sheet of paper.
It doesn't light up RGB like that, but yeah, it spits out the sheet of paper that looks like a receipt and basically tells you, it shows you the math. And I think back to that, all of that happened so quick, and I said I was going to let you go first, but I'll say it was overwhelming, but at the same time, I felt like we had a good control. I felt like my hardest part was patience. I wanted it all done then, and I saw the vision and the path of where we were going, but we couldn't do that because of terms in a contract for a good reason that said, we got to transition these clients over. We've got to do it this way or this will all crumble. And that was very real to me. I did believe like this would crumble because a lot of these clients, we had some leave that were just pissed, and they were pissed for the simple fact of Robert and Gary were retiring. It had nothing to do with us. They didn't give us a shot. They
and a good piece of information too for those listening is being that you had two 70-year-old partners who had been at this firm, who had started this firm from the ground up. Basically, they had a lot of clients that were here and worked with them for 30 to 40 years. So a lot of ingrained stuff, as we talked about earlier, people don't like change, especially older people don't like change. And so I think a lot of the clients were, they weren't happy about it. They didn't understand, they were used to what they were used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that was tough. I mean, being patient and trying to cooperate and, take care of these clients that the gentleman, the book of business they had built up over the years, and honestly balancing that against some of the clients just weren't going to fit with us regardless. And whether it be because of price, I mean, that was easy to point out right there. There were a lot of pricing issues that as Robert and Gary got closer to retirement, they truly just stopped caring about some of these things. And,
this happens normally.
It happens. Absolutely. But us being young, taking over a firm, we can't let that happen because we've got mouths to feed. We got to make payroll. So we have to raise prices. We got to do all these things. And that was a tough transition period. And I don't know. I don't think about it much now because I'm focused on where we're going. But when I look back, especially as it relates to just me and you when we first acquired it, I'm like, at times I'm like, man, we didn't know what we were doing. Like we lost 25% of our client base the first year you and I actually took over. 25% of our revenues were gone just without even we didn't have a chance to even get them because the clients just left.
Right.
And that was.
They got the letter that Robert and Gary wouldn't be here anymore and dipped out immediately.
Yeah. And even though we knew it was coming, that bank account, in the beginning, that was rough. And then now I also look back and I'm like, we actually had good control over it. Considering what it could have been had we just neglected a lot of it, we actually had good control, and it took a lot of effort and a lot of work. But I don't know. I have mixed feelings. Sometimes I look back, I'm like, I was such an idiot. And then sometimes I look back and we did a good job.
Melanie, from your perspective, what was that year like where the guys were still here? You guys had a tax season where you guys were transitioning. The deal was being done, but y'all are still working here with the guys. Talk through that a little bit.
First thing that comes to mind, what hits your mind when you first think about that? Can you put a word to it?
They had so many manual processes. I
inefficient.
Yes, and it. I'm trying to. I mean, for what they did, they produced a lot of work. I can't fathom
Could we do that now?
No,
it wouldn't work.
And why would? And I don't know why you would. Man, manual payroll. I can't even wrap my brain around.
No one listening probably really understands either.
Why you would do that.
I don't like automated payroll. I still feel like I messed that up. And manual payroll, where I have to physically write the numbers in.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, that's crazy.
It's just mind-boggling to me.
Mind-boggling. That's a good word for it. And again, their system absolutely worked for them. I couldn't believe in 2021 people did that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a bunch of that. You gave, a very good example that a lot of people watching may not be able to relate to, but in our industry and what we're doing, payroll and having to run it, how often we have to run it, that alone, I remember at that time it was taking me a week to run all the clients' payrolls. That's a week every month that I had to
stop everything you were doing.
Everything I was doing. And
there's no extensions on payroll. There's no.
Yeah. And that is a lot of time, like a full work week out of it. That's 25% of my time that I could be spending doing other things. And now I look back and I'm like, there's no way we could make that work. Not at the margins they were charging. If we charge $10,000 per month per client, then yeah, we could make it happen. But
well, I think also too, you guys, when you bought the firm and you transitioned here, you were in a time, and the industry was in a time where a lot of things were becoming automated, and with tech and just media, everything was changing, and so the industry was changing. And you guys bought this firm that really was probably 10 years, maybe even 15 years behind in their processes. And so you guys are really trying to push automation, which I think 2 years later, here we are, you guys have done that successfully, but it definitely took some time.
It's crazy to think like we're 2 years and I feel like, okay, yeah, we've kind of got it. And yeah, backdated. I feel like going into this tax season, we had it, but it took a year and a half. And in my mind, I thought it was going to be so much faster. It was not. It was uncomfortably slow.
Definitely.
For me,
yes.
I don't know how you feel. I mean, your experience may have been a little different. That's
why. Yes, it was.
Because you know how impatient I can get.
Yeah.
When you and I talk, that's part of the dynamic is like when we set our mind, we say we're going to do something. I want to do it like, okay, we're doing it right now. And Melanie is like, okay, we're going to schedule this out. Well, let's do it. But like, I'm busy right this second. And I don't know. I feel like that causes like a clash between our personalities at times, but that's how I felt going through the entire transition was I want to go. But then at times you just decided like you were going to shred some of the documents that we no longer needed, but the guys were like, whoa, what are we doing? Why are we shredding these documents? And you were like, they're from 1999. You don't need them. And they were like, so.
I wish that we could throw up on the screen right now. We can't, but I wish we could, a picture of how many boxes of paper we had to shred. And I don't even think I saw it all because when I came on, you guys already had basically a year
It was already done.
But we had easily a 10 by 12 space stacked 5 feet high. Just one of the shred days of just paper boxes.
And you're not even factoring in, keep in mind, Robert still has a storage unit full of stuff that he wasn't willing to get rid of, and it wasn't part of our so it's basically just all the old stuff.
He bragged to us because he went from like a 20 by 10 unit to a 10 by 10 because he knew how important it was to us to get rid of stuff like that, and he came and bragged, and he's like, I'm down to a 10 by 10 unit full of paper. I was like,
a lot of paper.
From 1968. I'm like, yeah, you could probably just shred the rest of it right now, but keep paying for the storage unit if you want, It's so funny.
Yeah.
Completely different mindset when it comes to accounting. They were raised in such a different era and generation that I get frustrated thinking about it, and that's how different it is because I'm like, there's just a better way to do this. I wonder as we progress through our firm, who's going to look at us and say like, there's just a better, like, what are you doing? You're hitting your head against a wall every day. I hope somebody has the courage to speak up and say that to us.
Oh,
when we get to that point.
Well, I think we're trying to keep open minds too as we grow and do new things and constantly researching, again, to the point of just trying to get better of not getting stuck in your ways because it's easy to do that.
It's so easy to do. Yeah.
So let's kind of transition a little bit. So you guys buy the firm, you have a transitional year. That catches us up basically to 2021 going on 22, which is when I came on here at the beginning of 2022.
Yay.
Talk a little bit about Melanie. I want you to speak on your client base now, how that transitioned now that you truly have your own client base. You obviously bought clients when you bought out the firm. That's part of the deal. But what clients do you work on? What does your day-to-day look like? Talking about basically through last year and then up to kind of current date.
So kind of jumping back to SBL, when I worked there, a good chunk of the clients there, they were mostly all service-based. And so that's definitely my background in history there. A lot of doctors, lawyers, and a whole lot of real estate, whether they were investors, landlords,
agents,
brokers, a couple of actual mortgage lenders were in there, but just a lot of real estate. And so not intentionally, but just because of who I worked for, I have a very strong background in real estate. And the odds and ends that kind of go with that or that are specific to the real estate industry. And so since then, I still have a lot of real estate. And I actually genuinely, personally like real estate. I would like to invest in more of it, have it around, that kind of thing. And then since then, my mom became a real estate agent, so that helps out quite a bit. And so I definitely like to work with real estate investors and their related parties, the accoutrement there. But also, as I've mentioned, a huge fan of music, giant passion of mine, comedy, live shows. Oh, I love live shows. Even if it's not like somebody I particularly want to see, it's still fun. but just in general, performers. When I way back in just art in general, I'm a huge fan. In high school, I took all the art classes and did all those things as well. Not very good at it. Not very good at it at all. Just for I can appreciate it, but I'm horrible at it. And so I definitely have a deep passion for arts, and so that's a nice overlay in the gamer content creation world. And so that's a nice overlap. And so I definitely, just on a personal level, appreciate, performers and
so
the makers and doers, if you will. And because of that, I've learned royalties. And
so you have a lot of content creators, but different from the content creation. Like Joseph and I, for example, work with Call of Duty creators, and so we're working with a lot of gamers. You have live performers, artists, so a different type of content in a sense, but still content creators nonetheless. Yeah, so that's really interesting. That's kind of an interesting distinction there, because you have, for example, you have stand-up comedians too. Like you have like people who play shows here in Savannah.
Got stand-up comedians. I've got a television producer. I've got now I can't think of any of my clients all of a sudden. I've got
I just want to say,
I can't think of. I got a VTuber. I got a couple of those actually. I also have a company that is, and I don't fully understand it, but I also have a company that. So if you're in the D&D world, I'm going to say a lot of things that probably you're screaming at me through your computer. I get it. I understand. But in D&D, kind of you have, it's not just you telling a story and then the players kind of acting it out, doing their part of it. But there's maps and storylines, and a whole lot goes into being the dungeon master, right? This is a company that kind of, I don't want to say circumvents that, but they are writing stories, creating maps, and doing everything in advance, so you don't have to come up with it on your own. You just get to play and lead it, depending on, I guess, which side of the proverbial table you're on there. And
that's here local, or that's like an online?
It is. So the sales are online. The company is based out of North Carolina. It's actually in Charlotte, but the owners of it, there's one in Greenville, one in Charlotte, and I forget where the other gentleman lives. But they were all high school buddies that are not high school buddies. Two of them are brothers, and then one was the high school buddy of one of the brothers.
Interesting.
And so, and they have played their whole life and just found this. We're doing this.
That's
it's
awesome.
A creative outlet for them. Sorry.
Yeah, so they took a passion that they love and actually provided value to other people, because now people can just pay for that service.
Right. And as I understand, that is a very, like I said, I've never played D&D, but it is a very long process to come up with those. And so this allows more gameplay.
Yeah.
Because somebody's already done the legwork for you.
So broad spectrum of content then for you, because we, as much as we try to niche down, I feel like we are getting more broad with game developers and stuff like that. And when I say we versus you, Melanie and I are so busy now. That was kind of a growth point for us, was as in the beginning, I didn't come over with any book of business. You already had a little bit of yours, especially, for example, real estate. But now we both have our separate books of business. And like that right there specifically, I don't think that you and I have talked in depth about it. So for me, I'm kind of hearing this for the first time as well, which is awesome, because as we run this firm and stuff like that, you have your book and you're taking it that direction, and then I have mine as well. Any overlap we have is obviously great, and it's great that you and I can sit here and talk about internally processes that, we can share amongst ourselves the processes that we have in place. But that's just awesome, because now I think that's part of growth, is me and you don't, like, what we used to get to do is work together on projects. We don't get to do as much anymore. In fact, you have your own book and I have mine. And so that's one thing that kind of sucks, because as you and I both own the business, and I feel like I see you less than anybody else
in here.
Yeah. So that is an interesting part of what we do. But yeah, that's really cool, that specific client, because I didn't really know much about that until now. So Joseph, you were going to say something though.
I was going to bring up that exact point. It's just that there's essentially two different firms kind of running, right? So we have the Orsini and Associates side, which is what Melanie originally had started with, and that's kind of where a lot of your real estate clients and those clients live. And then Game On Financial, which obviously, if you guys have caught up with the content and watched the podcast, you know what we're doing. So yeah, exactly what you just said, Garrett. You guys are, you learn as you go, but I think a lot of the time when you start getting busy and with the growth comes just you're busy all the time. Melanie's busy all the time. I mean, even me and you, Garrett, we film content together, but a lot of times we're doing our own things because you just get busy. And so people's time gets filled.
Yeah, once you get good at something, you know, it's a little bit different for us three now because we're all getting to that maturity phase of our career where, you know, you don't need me watching you and Melanie doesn't need me watching her, and we all know what we should be doing. Whereas, you know, an intern or somebody like Jamarian obviously needs guidance, and that, you know, there's a time and place for that. But unfortunately, the bad part about that is I've worked with y'all now so much. I want to continue working with y'all because that's what we're comfortable with. You know, you and I, Joseph, could sit down and knock out a project. You and I, Melanie, could sit down and knock out a project in no time at all and have a lot of fun doing it. But
for
that's
business,
wasting time for that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make sense. That's overkill for any project we're going to have for the most part. And so, you know, the times we do get to collaborate, if we have a big project come down the pipe, that's a lot of fun because it's like old times. But unfortunately, we just don't get to do that as much. Content's been great because now we can all sit here and talk, and this has been a lot of fun because I don't get to catch up with you guys. Joseph and I had a call the other night. I don't know how long the call ran, but we were talking business. And then how long ago was it, Melanie? You and I were on the phone for 5 hours talking business
At
and
like midnight.
Oh, yeah,
At like midnight.
like you call me. I want to say it was like 8:30 or something. And hey, real quick, I just want to run this by you.
Real quick, turned into
Like
5
12:30, I was like, all right, I really have to go to bed now.
It was like old times because I was basically
It was.
saying, "Hey, I'll see you in the office in a couple hours," and you were like, "Yeah, I might be a little late," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm probably gonna sleep in." How many? So going back real quick before we keep going forward, how many times at the old firm at TJS were you and I shutting the building down?
Every day.
Yeah,
I mean,
you were oftentimes the first one there too. You were turning the alarm off, and then when we were leaving at night, you were turning the
setting
alarm
it
back on.
Yes,
which is crazy.
That was crazy. But yes, that has been standard.
You spent the first 30 minutes of the podcast saying you didn't want to go into public accounting because of 80-hour work weeks, and then you were the first to show up to work and the last to leave in public
and I've
accounting.
absolutely turned into like a little baby workaholic. 100% I have.
You enjoy it.
I do enjoy it. I am now definitely focusing on how to like trim that back and have a little more of work-life balance.
Talk about that a little bit just before we wrap up. Just like now that you are a business owner, you do set your own schedule and you're not really answering to anyone. How has that been like a mindset shift, and like what challenges have you seen with that?
Man, that's a great question. I don't. I still feel like I have people to answer to. I mean, like nobody that I have to report to and go like, "I did it, boss." But I still definitely have a. You know, work has to get out the door. If I don't do anything, it sucks for all of my staff. So I still have people that I like have to report to, so to speak. I guess I don't have to answer questions too terribly much. I don't know. It's a different kind of pressure. That's how I'm going to phrase that. It's kind of similar to how we were talking about, like when you turn in a return and you're like, this is done. It could go to a client versus when you're actually signing it. Same kind of thing. I don't have a boss per se, but I still have people to report to and make sure it gets done. It's just a different kind of pressure.
And I definitely think with the time, the flexibility that you get with being your own boss, I think just time management in general, it shows like the different obstacles that happen there. Like when life hits you, I know both of you guys last year had personal things come up, which owning your own business is great because you have the flexibility to just say, I'm not coming in today. I have stuff to handle. And you don't have to answer to anyone, but also just like, there was also times last fall where you were here till 11 or 12 at night working because you had to get it done. So
it's got to get out.
Yeah, I think that's probably a shift as well.
That's a shift. Although I do feel like at the last firm I worked at, it's very similar mentality.
Well, because you had the responsibility there as well.
Right. It's got to get out the door. It's got to be done. What is nice about that in the sense of like, let's say all the partners were like, okay, I scheduled all these meetings. They're coming in to review the tax return. I need you to have it done by X. And like, it is so much easier to create a manageable schedule when you can say when those meetings are going to be versus going, okay, the 5 of you have meetings tomorrow and I have time for 3 tax returns. Who wants to eat it? Like, now I just wouldn't schedule myself that way, I guess is the way to say it. So that is nice.
How has it been having employees? Because, you know, I technically am one of your employees. I work more under Garrett, but we have another staff here, Druva, as well. And then we had 2 interns this year that are both coming on part-time. How has that been with actually having people that you have to pay? I know me and Garrett have talked about this a little bit, but How has that pressure been?
That is, yeah, that's that. I'm not gonna lie. That's the worst. I think that's the
Coming
worst
from your
pressure.
employee to ask you this, but
No,
still.
I'm very open, but it is like, I would say, and I know it should be my client. I love all my clients. Y'all are all amazing. But I will say, like, in some ways, taking care of my staff is like my biggest stressor.
I kind of, yeah. I mean, I disagree, but not. I disagree with the sense that the clients should be our utmost responsibility, you know, for you and I, because if there's been one change, if I've realized anything, and what actually matters now is, like, to me, in my opinion, the clients are not ultimately what I should be worried about. That's why Joseph and Jamarian and Carmen and Druva, you know, they're doing such a great job. I feel like if we enable them to be just who they are in general, they're going to take care of that. I feel like ultimately, and this goes back to what you were saying, our biggest responsibility is to the employees. And you mentioned, like, I feel like I have a lot of people to answer to. As I was coming up, I actually felt like I only had to answer to you and to Pam, our previous
That's
manager.
interesting, because when we worked together, that was one big shift from SBL to TJS. Is at SBL, I had 4 bosses. When I went to TJS, I had 8.
Yeah. Well, I felt like I had, well, that was ultimately one reason I left, was because as I got better, more people started trying to pull from my time. But in the beginning, I listened to you and Jennifer, and then ultimately I knew that Pam was my manager. And so, like, Pam would tell me if ultimately her opinion, what she said, went, even if it conflicted with you and Jennifer. I just did what she said ultimately. And
100% you should have.
yeah, exactly. But now, I like owning this, I feel like I don't feel like Jamarian and Joseph and Carmen all report to me. I feel like the opposite. Like, I owe it to, like, now I owe it to them. I have to do what's in their best interest. And sometimes it's not necessarily, you know, them coming to me, so to speak. It's more of, I have to know what their needs are going to, I have to anticipate what their needs are going to be, and then and lead.
Sure, they have the resources to
Garrett, how
do
many
it.
times have I like come to you and asked you something that you felt like put you on the spot, and then you had to either come up with an answer or.
And what have I always told you? If I don't have a good answer for that, there's a problem, right? Like, if you come and ask me, like, if you said, like, I'm going on vacation this weekend, and I say, no, you can't do that, you're going to, you know, in my opinion, your first question would probably be like, why? And I have to have a good answer for that. And so I'm always thinking about those things, and that has been the biggest shift. And when I'm thinking about that constantly, I don't have time to think about, like, client A, client B, this and that. And that sounds terrible, but again, since delegating a lot of that to Joseph and now to even Jamarian, like, you realize, like, all that stuff gets taken care of, and they do a good job. And now I can focus on bringing the work in,
running the business,
and doing all that. And I feel like that paid dividends this past tax season and even last fall. I feel like it will get better with time. But man, was that a shift of where, like, you think you're the boss,
delegating was
talk.
Like, not hard for me, but hard for me. Like, it's not, I wasn't like a control freak, but making myself stop and teach somebody to do something so I wasn't doing everything.
You get good at something, you want to keep doing it.
Well, and when you're in the pressures of, like, busy season and everything, stopping to tell them how to do it takes up more time than just doing it. But in the long haul, that takes more of your time when it's something somebody else could be doing, and forcing myself to stop and do that
100%
was totally a challenge.
I think what you guys are talking about right now, one, shows me that you guys have grown a lot just since I've met you, Melanie, but also just seen you grow in your career, Garrett. But it goes back to our conversation about career growth and being pushed. It's like, you guys as management level employees had certain responsibilities, and that pushed you to grow. But then now owning your own firm, it's a new set of obstacles, right? And then you've had to, like, get in, you know, like you said, delegation. Like, that's a huge way to grow your business, that you've had to kind of fight through that. So I think the original question I've asked you, put you on the spot, I think that's probably a great answer, is just delegation. Like, being able to figure out, how do I find the time to teach this person and teach them well enough where they're not going to be asking me this question for next year, and they can actually take it off my plate.
Yeah.
And I'm not naturally a good teacher. It's like storytelling. I'm not.
But that's growth.
I skip around and do, and so it's
that is growth. You're right. Doing things you're uncomfortable with and learning.
Yeah. And that's what's demanded of us at this point. And it is uncomfortable, because I wouldn't have said I was the best teacher, but kind of going back to what you said earlier, like, you know more than you think you do. And so when you're put on the spot and you have to teach, and once you start doing it, you're like, oh yeah, I mean, this is how I do it. And you lay it out, you're like, okay, that wasn't so bad anyway. And now you have another set of hands who can help you get to where you need to be. Right. And you're right. I mean, teaching, I wouldn't say, like, oh, I'm just a great teacher, but that's just what's required of us. Like at this point, we just have to teach. And I think it's been hard,
I think that shows the growth of the firm too. I mean, when you guys did purchase the firm that we talked about a few years back, it was just you two,
Mm-hmm.
And now we have 4 employees and still you two. So just having 6 people in the building, that shows growth. I think we're excited. And actually, this is the last topic I have for us to talk about as we kind of wrap up here is like, what are you guys' plans for the future? And I'll direct it at you, Melanie, to speak first of just like you're basically 3 years into the business, really two good years. It's summertime, so we went through tax season of 23. We're going into the fall this year. What does the rest of the year look like? And then what is your like 5-year goals? What do you think the future looks like for Orsini and Associates and Game On Financial?
Kind of immediate to long term is growth, but very strategic growth. Like, for example, right now, we're not just taking whoever walks in the door as a client. We are filtering industries and the people themselves.
More of a targeted growth as far as who we want to work with.
Correct. In the industry. Plus, it just makes a million different reasons, but we're targeting growth, which helps. I don't want to say slow growth because I do want to grow, but we'll do it at a pace that's not explosive, so we're detrimental to the business, but also it gives us a time to refine it and be really good at it.
I was just about to say, I think it's to uphold that quality that we want to. We recognize, and I think, Garrett, we talked about this on the last podcast, just being able to do it at a high level. You can't work with everybody. That's just the reality is we only have 6 people. If we bring on 100 clients tomorrow, they're not going to get the same level of service as the current clients.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so there's that. There is, as a whole, I definitely want to start backing down and getting into the pure consulting part of it as opposed to,
You don't like preparing tax returns?
I do like preparing tax returns, but
15 years into your career and you're over tax returns? No way.
no, and I actually do still like preparing tax returns. There's something so satisfying, like when it all balances and works, and it's just so pretty. But
you're an accountant for sure.
But you don't get
and I appreciate a solid spreadsheet.
But
with,
you don't get any of those
formatted.
anymore. The returns you work on are nasty.
Messy.
The interns and the part-time staff get the pretty,
The simple ones, and I get the ones that they're like, well, I don't know what this
I don't know
dumpster
what the hell
fire
this is.
Just here.
That's been the worst part of the career right there is like the only thing we get at this point are problems, like absolute. And that's a good thing for business in general. But when you like sit back and think about it, it's like, damn, I don't know the last time I got a clean return. Like just something satisfying. You just 20 minutes in and out and you just knock it out. No, we don't get those anymore.
No, no.
If we do, there's probably a problem. I understand that. But at the same time, it's just, it's funny to hear you say that. I would get away from tax returns if I could. 100%. I'd go into more of the consulting work and do strictly that. I think there's more money to be made in it, but I also think you can solve bigger problems that way.
Well, and it's what people pay for, I guess. That's where the real value is. But it's also like the analytical going, okay, if we do this, this is what it looks like. If we do this, this is what it looks like.
So like CFO type, like, is that what you're referring to? CFO type deal, comptroller type deal?
CFO, I mean, all of it in a big, definitely CFO, but I also more think about it as tax strategy too.
Advisory
planning.
Okay, so
what
more
if
all-encompassing.
scenarios? I love what if scenarios.
So more all-encompassing than what you would probably get from a traditional CFO. So
Right. And so I'm trying to get away from the data entry, but also I'd really like to, personally, even though I could not paint or draw, make a joke, sing a tune, none of that at all. I mean, just so bad at it.
That's kind of like Garrett with gaming. He's really bad.
bad at a lot of things. I know what my strengths are.
Go ahead.
Humbleness, is that you? Humbleness?
Humility, yes.
Yeah.
That's top tier strength.
Not.
Oh my goodness.
So over the next 5 years, I would like to get into more content creation because it is part of that advisory piece to it. It's a little bit of practice what you preach.
So you're saying create the content?
Yes, create.
I'm really glad you said that because if you didn't bring that up, I was gonna call you out.
Yeah. So yeah, practice what I preach. Get into the content.
Is that more to spread and market your brand, or is that more to educate people? What would that be for?
Or both?
Or both?
I would actually say it's a solid combo of the two.
Yeah.
I agree.
A solid combo of the two, and just shameless plug. I've only done my intro video and no other additions to it, but I also have a Whining About Taxes podcast.
And when that drops and you have a couple of episodes on there, or even just the first one, where can we find that? Will that be on Spotify?
It is on Spotify, YouTube.
Nice.
Yeah.
We'll drop the link in the description.
I was about to say anywhere you stream and get your podcast.
Yeah, that's what they say in it. That's what we're YouTubers now. We're podcasters now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can find that. Any other like content creation ideas related to that, or are you going to stick with the podcast for now and kind of see how that goes?
I'm going to stick with the podcast for now, dabble my feet, get it, again, as I said, I'm not a huge fan of being the center of attention. And as much as I like hearing my own voice and talking, I don't like the way it sounds to everybody else. And so you got to listen to it when it's out there.
Yeah, but I think that's a common fear. I think you get over that.
that
It's like signing the tax return. Like I think if you look now at the first podcast Joseph and I did, which was I guess 7 weeks ago to this point. Now, I mean, I just hop on here and it is whatever. But yeah, I think in the beginning that was definitely something I struggled with. So.
But that's okay because I have J-Man to edit it, so I don't have to.
Absolutely.
Shout out J-Man.
Shout out
J-Man.
I definitely think the future is exciting for us just because a lot of those first couple years.
Also, sorry to
Go ahead.
interrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick shout out to also D Daniels and D Daniels Media, who is helping me produce and do everything with my podcast.
Yep.
She's amazing, and that's what her company does.
Absolutely.
She's also a client of mine.
Yep.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Go D Daniels.
So she's local, but she actually helps clients all over the place set up their podcast.
Produce, yeah.
I mean, she helped you record it, like the whole nine. Like she helped
Yeah,
you
she
record it,
came in.
lighting, camera, all of it, right?
Make sure the sound was doing everything it was supposed to. And she even
I love
offers
that.
up if you need it. Like she'll help you design questions. She'll help you set up an interview if you want it. She'll help you find interviewees.
So how much would that is interesting. So how much would something like that run a traditional person? Because I think, for us, we kind of get the benefit of the doubt because we can like trade services basically. But do you know like a general pricing? Is that like $600 a month or does she charge by the episode? Because I think that's a dope service.
I think she does. And D, if I'm messing up your business model,
Well,
you can murder
maybe
me
not-
later.
Yeah, maybe not her
But
specifically, but in general.
Generally, what she does is basically comes in and there's like kind of packages you can buy, so to
Sure.
speak. And so I would say the big Mama Jamma package is you get so many episodes that she helps you with, but and she also does the editing and kind of some of the behind the scenes paperwork to make sure you get that RSS feed link button thing.
Mm-hmm.
She helps with all of that. And she does do some like coaching, like here's how you sound natural. Here's how to, if you need kind of mechanical advice on that.
Yeah.
She does that whole thing, and she will help you come up with like a title. And if there's like a certain, like you say, here's kind of the image or vibe I'm going for, she'll help you get there.
Yeah, I should point out she is not sponsoring this podcast, but apparently we're big fans of her because she's helped you out a lot, you would say.
Yeah.
Okay. So probably, but that service is probably running a couple hundred, 500 to 1,000 a month, or does she charge per episode? I don't know if you specified.
Well, like I said, it comes in packages.
Packages,
so,
sure. Okay,
yeah.
gotcha. Cool. Okay, so the future of going back to the future. So we're going to create content, and right now we're focusing on a podcast for like the O&A piece specifically. And then you also said you were getting into the consulting. Was there anything else, in the immediate to long term?
And I think at some point in the long term, I'd actually might get to the point where, like when we had to pay for CPE and go give CPE classes and somebody I would love to get into that too.
Like lead the CPE.
Like lead the CPE. Like that. I think that would be,
I think you'd be good at that.
in my golden age of my career, a solid place to be. I think I would enjoy that despite not being a good teacher or any of those things. But I can put some slides together and walk through
Well,
it.
a lot of those trainings are not necessarily interactive, so it's not like you're having to teach someone one-on-one. It's more of talking about a topic you know a lot about and being able to convey that information, which I believe you can do well.
Speaking one to many, yeah.
Yeah.
So do you see the O&A portion, as it relates to you and you're obviously making all the decisions, do you see O&A growing to be a big firm, or do you want to stay smaller, going for, and we'll just assume at this point, like 1 to 5 years, not like 50 years down the road, because that's hard to predict, but.
Well, even 50 years down the road, I will say this again, I'm not a big firm girl. Okay. Like, don't get me wrong, I want to grow this, but I don't ever want to be to the point where we have 30 partners and 500 employees, or you know what I'm saying? I don't want to be one of those, because once you start to get that big, it does require red tape, and you run into the lot of, we have to take this to the committee before we can make a decision. I want it to always be like, hey, here are the circumstances. What do we want to do? Boom.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to turn my phone off because I didn't think to do that earlier.
You're good.
I'm surprised it took that long to go off, but I agree with you, Melanie. I think for, as I can speak to Game On Financial and then O&A, obviously you and I are going to be coordinating on both of those as all this happens. Yeah. But you're more so, I wanted to hear your opinion on, on tape just because obviously you're the guest and I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. But I agree with you. I don't know from a revenue standpoint, I want to get as big as possible, but I want to keep, this is going to sound crazy, I want to keep the money here within what we already have, because I don't think, and we've seen other firms do this, I don't think you just keep growing the pie, but then you just have to split all the pieces smaller because you bring on so many partners that ultimately you didn't grow any. You were growing just
like
for growth's
my
sake.
Personal income and revenue is exactly the same. I'm just doing it with 10 extra people or whatever the case may be.
So yeah, over time we may bring on more employees, but I don't know, we may hit 10 employees total and say like, this is actually enough. This is pretty good. I think we should pivot into maybe content rather than continue to pursue one-to-one services with accounting, consulting, whatever it may be. So,
yeah. I also want to own more real estate. I'll throw that in there too.
Yeah, and I was going to point that out actually. And I know we're running on time here, but out of nowhere, you talked about real estate, but you had a rental house. You sold the rental house, and that turned out to be a good deal just because of when COVID happened and all that. The real estate market shot up. I sold my personal residence at that time, and that was awesome. But now we own this building. And so like out of nowhere, we weren't intentionally going out to just get real estate, but you ended up with a rental, commercial rental technically with this building. And you had kind of everything at one time. And now you've kind of peeled some of that back. But you just mentioned literally before the podcast started, you and your husband were looking at Zillow.
Yes, I'm going to look at a house later this afternoon.
A house, nice. I just want to point this out without throwing numbers out, because I don't have to know specifics to know this. It is way out of her budget.
We won't be getting it. But
she's going to go to the open house.
Yeah, I was about to say it has been going on the market for like 2 weeks, and it's literally 4 doors down from my current house. So I have been watching it.
Oh, I didn't hear that part. Okay, so
yeah, it's 4 doors. Yeah.
That's easy. Okay.
Yeah. And so when I knew it was getting ready to go on the market, I was like, oh, I want that one. I want that one. And then they dropped the price today because it officially went on the market. And I was like, oh, you can keep it.
I feel like when Joseph and I talked, Joseph's like, yep, damn, just had my floors replaced because of a plumbing issue. And then I'm like, well, the pump on the pool broke and I've got to fix that. And then I come back and he's like, I got to fix this now. And it's like,
it's always something.
It's always something. I think you replaced the floors in your
we were going to refinish them. We actually haven't done that yet. Basically, it requires us moving out of the house. Yeah. They sand everything, refinish it. Mm-hmm. You know what? I will just have creaky floors. It's
the joys of home ownership.
The joys of home ownership, and then owning a rental in this building. I mean, it's never ending.
It is never ending. It is never ending, but that's okay. That's okay. I'll get there. But yeah, long-term wise, I definitely want this to grow. I want to get more niched and specialized. I want to have my own content, potentially teaching classes and having a real estate.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Well, I think we got a good picture for today. And Joseph, I'll let you bring us home in a second. But really to summarize, I mean, so real estate, you work with a lot of real estate professionals. I don't know what real estate investors, professionals, all that. You also work with content creators, and you and I own the firm together. We heard a little bit about your backstory, a lot about your backstory. I honestly think we could probably sit down and do another podcast next week and still go on about some of the things. We didn't even talk about the highlights of our career and stuff. So there's still a lot of things we could talk about.
Melanie will be back on. She'll be back on.
I was about to say, but we can have you back on.
I'm here most Thursdays.
Most Thursdays. Yeah. Until you call at like 10:30 and say, hey, by the way, I'm not coming in the office today. We're like, oh yeah, we figured.
Yeah, if I haven't made it here by 10:30, unless there's a meeting on my calendar and I'm at somebody else's office, if I'm not here by 10:30, I'm not.
Perks of being the boss. Melanie just tells all of us what to do. That's what actually happens. But Joseph, why don't you bring us home? And don't forget to say this time, we're on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube, all that stuff. I'm going to let you do it.
Please like and subscribe.
There
if you're
it is.
Watching
please like and subscribe.
We're trying to grow the content. If you guys have seen, we're dropping shorts. We have a TikTok as well. You can find us on Game On Financial on TikTok. And yeah, we're going to be doing a lot more of these. So far, the podcasts have been mainly just me and Garrett. We are looking to get guests on. We're working up our guest list now. Most of them won't be like today's with Melanie here in the office. Most of them will probably be virtual, have people coming in on Discord and stuff like that. But we're super excited for that because we're going to have some clients that we have on that are creators, probably some other business owners in the scene. We know a few other financial advisors, attorneys, stuff like that. So we're super excited for that. So stay tuned for that and be on the lookout. Melanie, we really appreciate you
Thank you
coming
for
on.
coming on.
Thanks for having me.
This is
It was a
exciting.
pleasure.
You know, we take for granted that we get to see all the background of what we do, but part of what we're trying to do with the content is kind of show the, you know, behind the scenes and what the day in the lives look like here and stuff. So we thought it was crucial to have you on here.
Yeah, no, I'll do it again. I like talking.
Yeah. Well,
I'll do it.
I appreciate you taking the time out of the day. It's actually
Thanks for
fun.
having me.
It's funny you get such a highly paid accountant to sit here for an hour and a half and take that time out of her day. So no,
I'll send you a bill.
yeah, see, yeah, just I use the business credit card. No, we really do appreciate you. If you like Joseph said, if you're watching this video on YouTube after the fact, like and subscribe. We appreciate everybody, and yeah, we'll probably cut it there. But
if there are specific topics or items you want us to discuss, shoot that in.
Drop a comment below.
Drop a comment below.
Appreciate you guys.